All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. This is our first in a planned series of discussions about how state and local government agencies are using technology and data to support transformation of their child welfare systems towards prevention and treatment that strengthen families and improve child well-being. This webinar series is being sponsored by the Human Services IT Advisory Group, or Hizzytag. And if this is your first introduction to Hizzytag, it's a group of IT industry professionals who are working to strengthen collaboration with government in this area. The Hizzytag Children and Family Services Work Group is a subset of the larger Hizzytag Advisory Group, and this group is focused on technology and data solutions that move the needle on prevention, racial equity, and strengthening families and communities. The work group includes representation from PCG, KPMG, Tenable, Vinti, Barry Dunn, CGI, IBM, Accenture, Amazon, Northwoods, and the American Public Human Services Association, or APHSA. With that, again, I'd just like to welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Seha. I'm the Executive Director of Hizzytag, and I'm really thankful to have you all here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Heather Baker, who is moderating today's session. Heather?
Thanks, Jen. I am with Public Consulting Group, a member of Hizzytag, and we do work with child welfare and youth services agencies all over the country. We are working with about 15 states to support implementation of Family First Prevention Services Act, and we've worked with about 12 states to support projects related to implementing the Seawiss Comprehensive Child Welfare Information Systems rules. And so in the course of that work, I learned of some of the experiences that Colorado DHS has had in both planning for the implementation of Family First Prevention Services Act, while using Family First as part of an overall effort towards transformation of their child welfare system, and at the same time undergoing a modernization project for their Seawiss system trails. And so we felt that they would provide some really good information to other states and information technology partners about how these two major changes in child welfare have overlapped and informed one another in Colorado. Throughout the presentation, we're going to hear a presentation from Colorado, and then we're going to do questions and answers at the end. But if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, and then I'll try to facilitate the questions and answers at the end. If I see something in the chat that requires a sort of immediate response, I will break into the presentation and ask for our Colorado partners to address those questions. I would now like to introduce our speakers from Colorado, DHS, Department of Child Welfare. We have Angelina Callis, who's the project manager, focused a great deal on Family First implementation. Lorendia Smith, who is the Trails product owner, that's the Seawiss system in Colorado, and JP Sleeger, who is a data management and Trails team supervisor. So I will pass it over to you, Angelina. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I know we're probably all on different time zones, so I've started to try and say good day. So I hope everyone is having a good day. I'm going to share my screen, and like I put in the chat, we do have a PowerPoint we're sharing. I'm sure we can rely on our Hizzytag folks to get that out to you after today. So I apologize that didn't come a little earlier so people could review it. So Heather gave us a great introduction. Thank you so much. You know, the Department of Child Welfare, Family First conversation. I'm actually the Family First project manager, so almost all of my work is focused on that. So we'll just jump in here. Did introductions. We're going to do some background on Seawiss, Colorado's vision, then a little bit on Family First because we're talking about the two being intertwined. Then we're going to go specifically into implementing new technology while we're also implementing Family First. What does that look like? How has it been? And then We did provide in the slide deck a link to some other resources, so you'll see those. And then, like Heather said, we'll have some time for questions, definitely at the end. Please feel free to utilize also any of your Zoom tools, so folks can like raise their hands or give us little emojis, whatever you're feeling in the moment, and we would love that. Okay. First, we're going to do something fun though, because I always like to have a little bit of interactiveness in our Zoom era. So this is, I'm sure you all know, a QR code. So if you want to use your phone, you can. You can just turn your camera on, hold it up to your computer screen, and a little pop-up should show up that opens up a Mentimeter poll. And then if you don't want to use your phone, I will post in the chat the link. There you go. That's the link to the poll. So you can use your computer also. And then if you're on the phone and you want to participate, you can just go to Menti, which is MENTI.com. And you can enter in the code 978705. So we thought that it would be fun to see where people are in their process, both in Seawiss and in Family First. And also, I know there are probably going to be some folks on the phone who are not a part of any of those projects. So, but it's a good, nice little gauge for the Colorado team to know where people are, and for all of us to just feel a little bit more connected in seeing where we are in our processes. So I'm gonna let people sort of weigh in. We can come back to this when we get to the end and see how everyone has voted. But for now, looks like we're all in this sort of 2-ish area, almost halfway. The scale's 1 to 5. So we have a nice like middle range there. Okay. Now I am going to pass it over to Lorendia.
Yeah, thanks, Angelina. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. Okay, perfect. So thanks, everybody. As Angelina said, my name is Lorendia Schmidt, and I am the Trails product owner. And the title product owner, I'll explain a little bit later, but it is Colorado is working to adopt some agile principles in our Seawiss development. So I will talk about that a little bit. So this is speak a little bit about Colorado and what Seawiss looks like in our state. So we are a state supervised county administered system, and Trails is our Seawiss system. Trails was originally envisioned in 1996, if you guys can believe it, implemented in 2000, and then we began the modernization project in 2016, which coincides with the Seawiss rules release. So although we were already planning to update our system with the Seawiss rules, we decided to also work to become Seawiss compliant as we did our modernization system. So our system is used by about 5,500 people, and almost half of those are child welfare professionals. So these are people who work in the counties who are doing the direct child welfare services. Our other, almost half of our user population is our Division of Youth Services, which in Colorado, that is part of our juvenile justice service continuum. And it is mostly state employees who are working with youth, but also does include individuals from our judicial districts. In addition, we have some public providers who have access to our system. So this is child placement agencies, or what the feds refer to as child welfare contributing agencies, CWCAs. We also have state individuals who are in the system using it for foster care reviews and other oversight of our systems. So pretty diverse user group. Yes, so we refer to the overall system as Trails, but when we talk about that original system from 2000, we call that Trails Legacy. And then our modernized system that's bringing us into Seawiss compliance and updating our system, we call that Trails Mod or modernization. So you may hear us talk about legacy versus mod. I just wanted to clarify that for you all. They share the same database, but they have different user interfaces. So what this means is if there's a worker who's working with a family and child welfare, for example, they may need to go between legacy and mod. So they go do some work in legacy and they do some work in modernized trails. And so our modernization project replaces some functionality. It also modifies functionality. It also adds functionality. And at the end of the day, there is likely to be functionality that existed in legacy that we don't really need anymore. So maybe decommissioned. So that's where we are in our system. And so let's see. So I mentioned earlier that we are doing agile development. So that's why we have the two systems, is because we are slowly moving features from one system to the other. And I say slowly because, like I said, we started in 2016, it's now 2020. And so this is a hard process. And I know a lot of folks I saw on the continuum, a lot of people are early in their CCWIS implementation, and it's a challenging process. And so we can definitely talk more about that as we need to, but we are looking and have been implementing and continue to grow our what's considered agile development processes. So that includes a product ownership position at our Department of Human Services. It also includes a lot of iterative changes, so changing something, trying it out, and continuing to change. So that has been very important as it comes to Family First, which we'll talk about more as we go. So I think I'll stop there and pass it over to JP to talk about more of the vision.
Yeah, thanks, Laurindia. Hi, everyone. My name is JP Schleger. I want to talk about Colorado's vision for CCWIS and kind of talk about the changes that we're making from our legacy, our CCWIS system, to our modernized CCWIS system. And I'm going to focus at first on changes to the front-end application, just because it's a very visible change that affects a lot of people who are involved with the project and with the system. So our CCWIS application, it's a single pane Power Builder application. It's clunky, it's ugly, it's not user-friendly, it's not mobile. And really the way it was built at the time was it really only allowed users to focus on one task or a record at a time. So I think we have a pretty good systematic and programmatic foundation of the CCWIS system. We really were focusing on updating the front end to more of a web-based application that's more intuitive, it's more streamlined, it allows for a lot more flexibility. So we want to make the process for collecting and entering data for the caseworkers more comprehensive and streamlined so that children, youth, and families can thrive in their communities across Colorado. There was no really need to reinvent the wheel. We just kind of wanted to tweak a couple things and smooth out some of the edges. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in the slide to talk about Mod Squad, because Mod Squad is kind of one of the main components of building out this vision for CCWIS. We refer to Mod Squad, it's kind of a subset of a larger Trails user group that's made up a lot of county technical and super users and division program staff. And I think of them as kind of like an informal steering committee for the project over the past 4 years. The group has met almost without fail every single Tuesday and every single Thursday of every week for about 8 hours a day to gather requirements, to beta or workflow tests, to provide post-production support, especially after a new release or a new hotfix. We assist Laurindia, the product owner, with prioritization. And it's even a venue for our vendor to come and ask questions as they're building out new functionality. If they have questions, they can come to this group and we can get some clarity on that. So we're really focusing on a lot of these changes to how users are interacting with the system on the front end. Even if a lot of the processes throughout this process have changed over time, Mod Squad is kind of one of the few that remains consistent over the project. And we think the Mod Squad is so successful that we've replicated a lot of the functionality across different organizations. Laurindia talked about our youth services component of this. And we are focusing on the youth services functionality as the next big release. And because Mod Squad has been so successful for the county side of things, we've replicated that functionality for the youth services to have a dedicated group of people who meet to test, to flush things out, to answer questions, to test bugs, and so on and so forth. So even though Mod Squad has remained consistent, relatively consistent over the course of this project, organizational structures have changed fairly drastically in some aspects. We created formally Laurindia's position about 1.5 years ago, and we reorged the division to provide her some staff to assist her in succeeding in the role of a product owner. The IT department has and is currently undergoing changes as well. to adapt to the needs and the gaps in the project. We even are encouraging or encountering changes in the staffing of our vendor as well. So a lot of things change over time. And I think that the whole point of that is we've really learned the value in being reflective and retrospective throughout the course of this project, and we need to have a willingness to change. We're charting a course. We don't really have any footsteps to follow in. So I think a willingness to adapt and change to the needs and the shortfall of the project are some of the big takeaways we've taken as we're building out this vision for CCWIS. So I think I'll let Angelina and I talk a little bit about family first, and then we'll talk about how these two intertwine a little bit later on.
Okay, there we go. I can't get my mute and unmute. I need to learn the shortcuts. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so Family First in Colorado. Again, I'm going to do a super brief background because I know, we only have an hour, which isn't actually that long, and we want to answer some questions and really have a conversation too. So this is just to sort of give us a baseline of the values that were set forth in Colorado, specifically around how do we want to implement Family First? What do we really want to keep in mind? What do we believe the philosophy of Family First to be? And then how do we move that forward and keep it in our minds and in all of our practice as we're building out the implementation of this? So I'm not going to read through all these, but you can see family and youth voices, using an integrated approach, shared accountability. We want to use scientific evidence, and of course, like strengthening the supports that are already in the state. So we really focused on building a true system of collaboration, especially given the fact that we're county administered. We really couldn't make decisions at a state level and then just say, okay, this is how we're going to do things, because counties are stakeholders. And so they need to be involved in the decision-making process. They have to be involved in the design. They need to be there from the beginning to the end. So it's not going to be successful if we don't include them. We also, again, as you can see, the first bullet, family and youth voice, it was really important to us that we made sure we were talking to and including folks with lived experiences. So when I get into the next slide, you'll sort of see the structure of how we're doing Family First implementation. But I want to point out that we have tried very hard to include sort of as many levels as we can of involvement in that, in our work groups and in our implementation team, and just in our meetings in general. So currently we have a former foster alumni of CARE who participates in multiple work groups and implementation team. We also have a kinship grandparent who participates in all of those things, as well as a new foster family parent. So again, just really giving them decision-making power in the process and the space to voice opinions and ideas and all of that stuff as we're designing. So here's a little visual of the structure. So this is our Family First I team, our implementation team, and essentially part of the initial process for Colorado was assisted by Casey Family Programs, but the creation of what we called a roadmap, which was setting out all the vision and how we wanted Family First to be implemented here in the state. What came out of that was this, the implementation team and the structure. So at the top, you'll see us, obviously, Colorado Department of Human Services, the Delivery of Child Welfare Task Force. So that actually is a task force group that was specifically created out of legislation and statute. And they run and interact very closely with the implementation team. So, but the task force is focused on child welfare system in a much larger, broader capacity, whereas implementation team is focused very much just on Family First. So we have the implementation team, and then these are all work groups, which are sort of managed by this implementation work plan. So we have the American Indian Alaska Native work group, which is the newest. The assessment work group, so they are tasked with helping us figure out the qualified individual requirement and how we're going to implement that. Service Continuum Work Group. So they are pretty much in charge of all of the prevention planning. That is a big group and they have lots of tasks. We have QRTP Work Group, obviously, to help us look at the placement continuum and how we're meeting that requirement. Juvenile Justice. I think you heard Lorendia talk a little bit about Colorado is a bit unique in where our juvenile justice folks, children and youth live sort of in our system. And so we have included them again from the beginning in the conversations of how Family First is going to be implemented. And then because Candidacy is so special and unique, they have their own work group also. And we'll get a little bit into that, why it's so unique in Colorado and sort of what that work group is doing. But then, of course, there's these filter groups down at the bottom, which have been ongoing and were sort of involved outside of Family First, but that the work definitely correlates with on an ongoing basis. So we have a constituent engagement group, legislative, fiscal, policy, IT and trails, training, and then communication. So that's the super high level overview. And I think now I'm going to swing it back to JP, who's going to talk us through a little bit of the timeline.
Yeah, thanks, Angelina. So now I'll talk a little bit about the convergence of CCWIS and Family First. We had the implementation team kind of developing, policy oversights and insights kind of at the beginning. And I think it was maybe May of 2019, we finally had a big meeting between a lot of our Mod Squad CTUG people and a lot of the chairs and the members of the I team to kind of flush out with our current best understanding of what Family First is supposed to look like, what we want this to look like, not only in our legacy CCWIS system, but also in our modernized Seawiss system, because both of them still have to operate simultaneously. So we had a couple of meetings where we had the policy insights of the I team with the kind of the systematic and the programmatic understandings of Mod Squad to come together to figure out how we're going to build this out and what we can and what we can't do. And I think we maybe had 2 or 3 meetings to flush out all of these details, and there were a lot of cooks in that kitchen. And despite the various understandings and perspectives, it was a really robust and productive conversation about how we're going to build out Family First functionality in both systems. So the discussion of the design of trails, like I said, both on the legacy system and in the modernized system, was very inclusive at the beginning. We had a lot of insight and a lot of experts in that room to figure out how best to build it out with the best understanding that we had at the time. Knowing that things change and policies become clarified, and we are provided more guidance from the feds. So we know that we'll have to make changes, and we even have made some changes to some of our functionality that we've built out and planned out. And I'll talk a little bit more about a specific example of that in the next slide. But we have this constant iterative of conversations between the I team, who meets once a month, Mod Squad, who meets continuously, and kind of the Trails user group, and there's always conversations happening across that to make sure we have all aspects of this covered. But it was a very robust conversation to plan out what this was going to look like to the best of understanding at the time. And we have a training team within the department who interfaces a lot with our vendor and with the ITM and with the Mod Squad to not only provide communications, but to also provide training and tip sheets for how to interact with this new functionality. And I think we'll discuss some of that phased implementation on the next slide. Yeah.
Thanks, JP. And, JP really speaks to this first question of how do we coordinate being in different phases of implementation. And I'm tracking some of the questions in the chat box, and I see one from Alex Grodner, who says, with being county administered and the counties being stakeholders in the decisions, how did you engage them for large decisions, and how do you continue to keep them engaged? So I do really believe having these 2 parallel tracks really did help us with this. So we have lots of, Angelina showed you the overall kind of governance structure around Family First. So we are bringing stakeholders together regularly to talk about Family First programmatic and policy decisions. And then we have a whole separate train that's happening right around the Seawiss modernization. And I think because those both exist, it helps us bridge that gap. And sometimes those questions, like JP said, had to happen multiple times. And I just want to address it while I'm there. Alex says, any snags with difficult stakeholders. And I would say that the most difficult stakeholder has just been like the uncertainty of Family First, right? We're not exactly sure. And so many times it was just a matter of needing to talk about things multiple times and kind of coming to the best guess or best decision we could, and then be willing though to look back at that and change as we needed to. So let's see here. I just need to check my notes really quick. So JP is going to talk about this next item, the challenge around design decisions. So JP, pass it to you.
Yeah. So thanks, Lorindia. So yeah, one of the things I talked about previously was we had to build out what we thought this functionality should look like based on our best understanding of policy at the time. And at the time, this was a year and a half ago. And we kind of knew that we would probably have to make some tweaks as users interacted with this, or as we learned more, or as the feds provided more guidance and policy around this. So one example I really want to talk about is Angelina actually came to our Mod Squad group. I don't know if it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago. We have all of the FFPSA functionality built out in both systems, but it's only a small segment of it is active, and that's the for candidacy. So Angelina came and joined Mod Squad with a couple of her iTeam members. And we talked a lot about some of the data that we're seeing as users are completing this 4E candidacy form. And it really helped inform some changes that we really need to make to not only some of the language that we're using on the form, but some of the overall functionality and triggers. We made some relatively drastic changes based on the data and the conversations that we're having around how users are interacting with this and what's working and what's not working. So we knew we had to make these changes. And with the Seawiss system, generally speaking, it was relatively easy to phase caseworkers in because it was the same practice. They were just changing how they were interacting with the system to enter this information. And a lot of the difficulty with phasing in FFPSA with the Seawiss is that they have to learn new policy and a new application at the same time. So it's been challenging. I think we've done a good job of paying attention to what's working and what's not, and changing as we need to. But that's one of the difficult things about this FFPSA implementation is building the system, not really knowing what we're going to have to do, and then being open to making these changes as we learn what works and what doesn't work. One of the things that we also talk about being is consistent and iterative. And one of the things that we've learned, kind of anecdotally, is we want to be as transparent and as communicative as possible. And I'll kind of use a joke as an example, but back in maybe a year and a half ago, we talked about keeping people informed with a Trails newsletter. We wanted to provide people with what's going on in terms of the project, especially because we are a state managed, county administered system. We wanted a way to keep the caseworkers and the supervisors and the managers informed with what was going on at the state level. And we thought the best way of doing that was through a newsletter. And we found out after we were developing and disseminating this newsletter, we heard from a lot of different people from a lot of different aspects of this project. They're like, ugh, I don't have time to read a newsletter. And there was a lot of disdain for the concept of a newsletter. So we had some working sessions, and we kept the same concept. We kept the same idea of providing regular weekly updates on what's changing in the system. Are there any outages coming up? Are there any state or federal changes? But we just tweaked the terminology from a newsletter to a weekly update. And while we still don't have as consistent or strong of readership as we would like, providing that consistent iterative weekly communication has been very valuable. And we've taught Mod Squad to emphasize checking in on the weekly update, and our division liaisons about encouraging people to read the updates just so they can stay in tune with what's going on and what to expect. So. But it's being consistent and iterative is a huge benefit of and a huge lesson learned throughout this project.
So I think I was going to talk a little bit about the sort of middle bullet there, viewing Family First as a department level systematic change or systemic change, and not just a child welfare project. So that's been, in all honesty, a little bit of a struggle. I think when Family First was passed, it's seen as child welfare legislation. And so, it all sort of fell to the Department of Child Welfare to plan and implement and bring folks together and figure out how we want to, roll out Family First. But as I'm sure you're all experiencing, as you're looking at prevention planning, and maybe even building out the placement continuum, it's much higher than that, right? It's really a systematic change in how child welfare interacts with the other systems around it. And so what we've really tried to do is look at, when we're talking about submitting, right, for reimbursement, or when we're talking about required data that we're going to need to collect from programs who are providing evidence-based services, that is stuff outside of child welfare, early childhood, right? The Office of Early Childhood, the Office of Behavioral Health. And so we've really had to lift up our way of thinking to a much broader perspective and think about how are we as a whole human service agency going to meet the compliance and the requirements for reporting that doesn't just necessarily fall on Trails, right? Because Trails is our child welfare and Division of Youth Services system, but early childhood doesn't necessarily use it. Behavioral health definitely doesn't use it. And so how are we going to bring all of those parties together to really figure out how we maintain our standards, but also not have everything sort of fall on the back of child welfare, because the program of Family First is so much bigger than that. So I think, Laurindia, you were going to help me talk a little bit about what this means for like ongoing changes.
Yeah, and I see a question in the chat box about like, can you also speak to how you address solution design prior to policy implementation? And I will say, being in an agile environment is what allowed us to do some of this. We've had to make some major shifts and it's still underway of what it means to have a tech system like this, and that it's never done. There's not a point when everything's done, that it's constantly in a state of change and iteration, and not change just for change's sake, but change to help us do better, to make it easier for workers, to make it so that we can solve some problems. And so we definitely had to make design decisions before we were clear on policy. And that's hard. And I would say sometimes, the design conversations forced us to make some policy decisions. We had to say, okay, how do you guys want us to interpret this? Here are some options for building it. What do you guys want to do? And so that was some hard conversations. And like I said earlier, we didn't get them all right, and we knew we weren't going to get them all right. So we are planful, and we know that we have space to change what's in our system as we learn more, and working for the future, planning in the future, setting aside budget money to allow us to make changes in the system as it relates to Family First as we need it. So if we go on to the next slide, Angeline, I think I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about candidacy. So, and we've touched on this a little bit as we've spoken, but just to go into some more detail, is that candidacy to us was a really core value of Family First, and a core value in Colorado. So in Colorado, we really value supporting families as early as possible with the lowest levels of intervention. So we really saw candidacy at the federal level to be such a great opportunity. And it's such a philosophical shift, right? But Colorado was so excited to make this, because we don't want to be serving families by removing children and needing QRTEP type placements. We have been for many years and want to continue serving families in their homes, and long before, if not long before, but before possibly even a call to child welfare, to a child abuse and neglect hotline. And so for us, starting with candidacy felt like it needed to be the place we started. So I think, JP, I'll pass it to you just to talk more specifically about how we did it.
Yeah, so thanks, Laurindia. And I think I covered it a little bit in my discussion about Mod Squad and kind of the vision for CCWIS, but having Mod Squad as a comprised of county super and technical users, in addition to some child welfare program staff, and representatives from Angelina's candidacy groups. We tried to be as inclusive as possible. And, obviously there were times where we learned that, hey, maybe we weren't inclusive enough, or we included the wrong people, or we did not include the right people. But from the get-go of building out the system and specking out what we wanted to build and how we wanted to build it, we tried to bring in as many diverse voices as we could, whether it's those division representatives, or 4E workers from a county, or ICPC workers who interact specifically with functionality. We always try to bring them in when possible to flesh out any additional business rules, or what we wanted the functionality to look like. And of course, like I said, we brought in the state program staff who oversaw a lot of this functionality to make sure that we were aligning with rule and statute. We did a lot of robust workflow testing. So when we were getting ready to roll something out, we would bring in a lot of county users and make sure that they could test the system, front to back. Because we would do the high-level testing as a mod squad group, but we really wanted people to get in the weeds to see what they could do, what they couldn't do, what they should, what they shouldn't do. So we had a lot of robust workflow testing sessions with a lot of different kinds of end users to make sure that it was functioning as best as it could, given kind of what we knew and where we were at the time. We would also have multiple train-the-trainer sessions. So, we had, some super users who made up Mod Squad, but we also had super users throughout the different counties who were meant to act as agents for training and change. Especially some of the smaller counties could go and talk to their super user to learn about the new functionality of the new system. So we would have a lot of these train-the-trainer sessions to build it out. Like I said, some things worked and some things didn't, and we tried to reflect and document what did and didn't work so that we could change and adapt and learn going forward.
So the candidacy work group, that's my bullet. So the candidacy work group did help create Colorado's broad definition of candidacy. And then they sort of like closed themselves down and then realized that with the implementation of the candidacy screen and trails, which happened right before we're opted in. So we're not opted in yet to Family First, but that screen went live in trails the end of May, is that right? Yeah. And so the candidacy work group realized after that, let's get back together and see how things are going. Since we have an opportunity here to really analyze and break down what's happening in trails with candidacy, let's see if there's things we need to dig into more. So that work group continues to meet. They continue to, like JP said, we just joined Mod Squad last week. They're working with our data analysis team to analyze some data. I mean, they realize that their work is ongoing, and that they're going to continue to support the implementation of candidacy in trails, even though they felt like once they did the definition, their work was done. And then I think, Lorinda, you're going to take the last two on these slide, right?
Yeah, and I think I've actually made my points that I was planning to make ahead of time, so I think we can keep moving. I know we're getting close to 12:40, and I see lots of great questions coming through.
Yeah, I know there's a ton of questions, so we're going to have to figure out how we want to. If we can't get to all of them, we'll follow back up. Okay, so what I was saying before sort of leads into how are we utilizing the opportunities that we have because we implemented the candidacy screen in trails long before we're choosing to opt in. How are we utilizing the data from that? So like I said, the candidacy work group has asked and pulled on our research and data analysis team inside the state of Colorado to pull trails data and help us analyze it and see, like, are people completing the screen correctly? If they're not, what sort of training do we need to develop to help them address those things, right? Are they understanding that when we say, a child or youth is at serious risk of removal, do they understand what that means? Or, are they not understanding and they're clicking the wrong button? And so, I'll just say, in all honesty, what we've already seen is that people click none of the above a lot, right? They're in there and they're like, I don't know, so I'm just going to click none of the above, and that'll get me past this screen and I'm good. So, you know, we went to Mod Squad, we talked to them, we're like, okay, how can we solve this problem? If we remove none of the above option, what does that mean? And then also, not just removing that option, but what sort of training material do we need to provide to county staff so that they understand what they should be selecting instead? So there's a lot of crossover work happening between the folks in the candidacy work group, which again is county representatives. We have some providers, service providers on that group. We have a training, learning and development person, and I attend every session. So we're always going back and forth with internally, and then also with Lorindy and JP to check in on things that we think we need in terms of trails. So like I just said, that's engaging providers. We know that because of our broad definition of candidacy, when we get to the point that we're ready to talk about how do we define candidacy outside of child welfare, we know that that's going to be a discussion again with the trails team, right? What does this look like? How are we capturing it? How do we collect the data we need? Work with us, right, as a team. Same thing with financial reimbursement. We started having conversations just a couple months ago about how are we going to claim for this? If we, inside child welfare, when the data's in trails, might be an easy answer. But then when we talk about, like I said earlier, early childhood programs or behavioral health programs, how are we going to claim for those things if the data is not in trails? And how are we tracking candidacy, right? Sort of all of these discussions that we're now able to better have because we have sort of tested out candidacy within child welfare. We know how it functions. We know how people are responding to it. And it gives us an opportunity to better predict how it's going to look outside of child welfare. So we're on the last slide. This is our other resources. I'm not going to walk through them. Heather also put a great link in the chat to our Family First Digest, which comes out twice a month. If you're interested in seeing our communication material, that's a great resource for sure. And now I'm going to cut it off so that Heather can help us take some questions.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for all of that, you guys. I'm going to try to, some of the questions I think are coming just to the panelists. So we've got a bunch of questions, even if the folks in the chat can't see them all. We did get a couple of questions related to advanced planning documents and federal approvals. So can you guys speak to this sort of sequence of events around getting APDs approved and then having to make changes and how that process has gone with the feds?
Yeah, so I'll take that question. So we submitted our APD or IAPD update in September of 2019, and that included changes that would be, let me put it this way, scope that would be added to our modernization project to meet the Family First requirements. We did this in a multi-phase process. So phase one, we knew we needed prior to Family First implementation or aligned with Family First implementation. That was our goal. And so our IAPD was submitted and it was conditionally approved based on knowing that we would not get formal approval until our prevention plan was approved. And so if you remember the timeline, the prevention plan was ultimately not submitted until much more recently. And so we are in that kind of conditionally approved period around our CCWIS. However, I mentioned the two phases. The phase one was like, what's the bare minimum functionality that would allow us to meet the Family First requirements? So it's QRTP, it's candidacy, it is the prevention plan change. So relatively, so certainly not everything, right? And more coming. And I think the candidacy is the best way for me to describe this one is our system is set up in a way that it's profile based. Based on your profile, you have access to certain things. So we know that child welfare workers need to do candidacy. Like we know that. We don't, right? Like we don't need the feds to approve that part, although they will, hopefully, right, through the prevention plan. But like we knew that was a given, and so we included that in our phase one. we do not have candidacy forms for youth services in our phase 1 because we weren't sure. We're not sure how candidacy is going to work with that population, so we didn't include it initially. So we sort of tried to make the safe bets on what is the functionality that we're pretty confident is going to work regardless of what questions the feds ultimately have about our prevention plan. And then I just wanted to add, before IAPD was submitted, we had lots of conversations with federal partners. So we have a monthly call where we were checking in with them, talking about our ideas. They helped us connect to other states as we needed. And so it wasn't a surprise drop in their lap, right? It was something that we had lots of conversations about. And then we also, like I said kind of earlier, we do anticipate that there will be additional changes, and those are going to be added to our annual APD updates as we identify those.
Thank you. We got a couple of questions about change. One was around, are there ways that you're communicating around change in addition to the Mod Squad and the newsletter? And then another question just about like change fatigue, and if your workers are, or other people who are impacted by both the process changes for Family First and changes related to functionality for trails, and how you're addressing change fatigue and change management in general.
I'm looking to see. I mean, I just want to be pretty honest that I think we do have change fatigue in our state. We had change fatigue before Family First came on. And part of that is we're a state who wants to try new things and are excited about new things. And so it's definitely hard, and it's definitely something that we have lots of conversations about and try to engage folks as much as we can. And, you know, I think sometimes, like something so major, like even candidacy, right? We talked about this work group that's been going, that's been meeting, and like they keep talking, and that's the core group who's been talking about this for 2 years, and they're still sometimes needing to like revisit decisions. And so I think it's just really owning and being very transparent with the fact that we know we're not going to get it right the first time, and we're not waiting for perfect, that we're going to learn and grow. So Angelina, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add with that around Family First specifically.
I think it's very similar. I mean, if I'm being honest, you know, the implementation team started long before I came on to the state of Colorado. The folks who signed up to participate in those sessions agreed to a year, and it's now been 2. So there definitely is some feelings and strong emotions around the continued sort of ask for their participation. And of course, awareness that like this takes up a big chunk of time and it's a lot of work, and they want to continue to participate in the development, but also recognizing that there are days when it feels like it's not going anywhere and we didn't get anything done. And, you know, the best we try to do, I would say, as like the project manager and the co-chairs of the implementation team on this Family First work, is really help folks see where work is moving, and where we have completed some really big pieces of process design and policy, despite the fact that it feels like sometimes we're going backwards.
And
okay, I have a pretty...
Sorry, I just wanted to add, I chuckled a little bit right as I finished speaking, because I saw that the note and the comment from Lynette Overmeyer, who's one of our dear partners out in Mesa County in Colorado here. And she said, we don't have change fatigue, we have hurry up with trails mod fatigue. And so I did want to say, you know, our decision to implement Family First ultimately did delay completion of our trails modernization project, because we were adding a decent amount of scope in the middle of a project. And, you know, with the delay ultimately and submission of our prevention plan, because of many challenging policy questions that came up, you know, it's hard to know if that was the best decision or not. But it is really nice right now to know that as soon as our prevention plan is approved, we can start working, right? We don't have to then wait 3 to 6 months for functionality. So it was a hard decision. And we definitely have some consequences from that, but it was a value to implement Family First, so we did make that decision.
And I'm wondering, JP, sorry, Heather, I'm cutting in because I think I've seen this one 3 or 4 times and it's an easy one for JP to answer. How long has Mod Squad been going again?
Yeah, so I was involved in the project, not from the very beginning of it. So I can't speak to kind of what was happening at the beginning or when specifically they started. But I know that Mod Squad, my involvement with Mod Squad has been probably 3.5 years, and I think they've been meeting for at least 4 years. And like I said, almost without fault, every single Tuesday and every single Thursday for 8 hours a day, the group has been unwavering in their commitment to making sure that this new system meets the needs of the caseworkers and the supervisors and the managers, and as a state, as the overseeing entity. It's been an invaluable group of people who have been committed to the success of this project, and we would be nowhere close to where we are without them.
We got a couple of questions about the ways that an agile approach has contributed to your ability to be iterative. One, can you share what technologies help enable a move to agile? Any technologies in use now or in the future for integration with other applications?
Yeah. So we use Azure DevOps as our tool where we track all work related to the Trails modernization project. And we have found that to be a really useful tool to be tracking a backlog and working to prioritize. I think though with Agile, it's really a shift in perspective. We're so used to quote unquote waterfall, which is you work really, really hard and then one day you release the whole new thing. And honestly, I feel like that's sort of what we expect with policy, right? Like family first passed, and then they're like, okay, plan, submit your prevention plan, and then, okay, you're ready as soon as we approve it, right? And that's just not the reality of how we work. So in a lot of ways, Agile principles really match, I think, what we experience every day, but actually putting that into practice is really hard. And so we've recently brought in some experienced Scrum Masters as well as some experienced Agile coaches into our development teams to help us keep improving and growing how we're actually doing that. I think a really good example though of how we did it well is this candidacy form, right? We developed it, we put it in, now we review data, and then we're making changes, and those are going in about 6 weeks after the time those were the final design change decisions were made. And that's really exciting because it's so much more responsive, but it's hard. It's a hard thing. And it's also hard in terms of prioritizing, right? Because anytime you change something, it's kind of an added scope. And so you have to then either say no to something else or delay a timeline or add money. And those decisions are incredibly challenging. And I'm happy to, I know Angelina's going to put some contact information. I'm very happy to talk through it with other states about that because it's just hard.
So a question for each of you. What have you learned through this process that you wish you would have known in the beginning? And how would that have affected your project?
I'm laughing, Angelina, because I think the IMD issue at the federal level was probably the thing that we felt like we wish we had known that at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, so I think most folks on here familiar with Family First will know or have heard of the Institute of Mental Diseases and the conflict with QRTP placements. So that's definitely been a big stop and challenge for Colorado because we need to make a change to all of our congregate care facilities. But I don't necessarily know that that would be a thing that we've learned through the process. I would say because we've hit that as such a hard challenge and it's been such a big barrier, I would say that, as much as we love to focus on the vision of how we want things to be, we need people in the room who are having those realistic conversations with us. I definitely think we could have planned better to address the IMD issue if it was something we had recognized as a really big barrier in the beginning. And so You know, I say this a lot, like as fun as it is to talk about prevention services, that none of those things are required under Family First. And so that's the real fun and exciting part. But none of that can really happen unless we solve this other thing, right? The QRTPs and making sure our placement continuum is actually fitting the needs of children and youth in the state of Colorado. And so I think for me, that's the thing that we've really learned on the sort of practice, non-technology side, is figuring out who are the voices we need to have in the room to make sure that they are challenging us and pushing back on us, to keep us grounded in the work. And then I don't know about from the technical side, that's like a whole other animal.
Yeah, you know, I think I wish we had known we would be so delayed in our prevention plan. You know, like I said earlier, it did mean delaying Trails Mod completion. And that's a hard pill to swallow from where we sit right now. And, you know, I don't think we could have known, right? And so, yes, if we had known, we would anticipate not submitting our prevention plan until later in 2020 and getting approval hopefully in early 2021, we probably would have delayed the Family First work and focused more on Trails Mod work, but you just don't know, right? That's a sort of crystal ball moment. And then trying to think, JP, is there anything you would add to that question? It's such a good one. It's hard to know how to answer.
It's a really good one. And you know, my perspective is a little bit more global, kind of beyond FFPSA. So you know, my perspective is more grounded in kind of CCWIS development than it is specific to FFPSA. So I don't want to take the time of anyone else who wants to talk about the combination of the two. But yeah, my perspective is more with CCWIS specifically.
I think we just have time for one more question. We just got a really big one on the IMD issue related to QRTPs, so I might have to refer that one to be followed up on later, unless you want to hit that, Angelina.
No, Colleen, please email me. I'm happy to set up a call where we can chat about our Colorado's approach to the IMD issue.
Okay, and our one last minute, any final words of advice that Colorado has for other states who are going through this process and might be just a few steps behind you?
Don't let perfection get in the way of good enough. Make the best decisions you can with the information you have, and know that you probably won't get it all right, and that's okay. And just to keep moving through it. And I say this as something I tell myself on a weekly basis when it comes to our CCWIS project overall.
And I think just from my side, it's the same from the practice side. But also, you know, I know a lot of folks were putting in the chat, like engagement's important, family voice is important, recognizing that always being the first to have done something, or within the first, right? Like the first state to submit or the first state to be done with CCWIS, like those things are exciting. But real engagement with family, children, and youth in the communities that we serve takes time and commitment. And so being first doesn't always mean being best.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to everyone who attended for your time. Angelina, we will get your PowerPoint presentation out to everyone with all of the contact information. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.